Hey, stop scrolling for a second. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just a story. It's something that happened in a house full of marble floors and empty hearts. A house where kindness was mistaken for weakness, and cruelty wore a $5,000 dress. It started with a scream, a whip, and a young woman who had nowhere left to run. But it ended in a way that nobody at that party, not even the woman throwing the punches, ever saw coming. Stay with me. This gets unbelievable. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Before we start, tell me, where are you watching from today? Which country do you belong to? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Today's story is one of the most emotional ones we've ever told. About power, pride, and the kind of quiet strength that money can never buy. I promise you, by the end of this, you'll be wiping your eyes. But I won't spoil it. Let's just say, not everyone in that ballroom made it out with their reputation intact. Nobody expected the night to end like this. The Hastings estate glittered like something out of a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers dripped golden light over 300 guests in tailored tuxedos and gowns that cost more than most people's rent. It was the engagement party of the decade. Billionaire real estate mogul Daniel Hastings and his soon-to-be wife Victoria Lane, a woman as beautiful as she was feared. Everyone whispered about Victoria behind polite smiles. She was sharp-tongued, demanding, the kind of woman who fired household staff for folding towels the wrong way. But Daniel didn't see it. Or maybe he didn't want to. In the kitchen that night, a young woman named Amara Johnson moved quietly between trays of champagne flutes. Her hands steady despite the ache in her feet. She'd been working for the Hastings family for 8 months, a scholarship student paying her way through nursing school by serving rich people canapés on weekends. She needed this job. Her little brother's medical bills depended on it. Amara wasn't supposed to be noticed. Staff never were. But that night fate had other plans. It happened near the grand staircase. Victoria, 3 glasses of champagne deep, was showing off her engagement ring to a circle of admiring friends when Amara passed by carrying a tray of drinks. A slight bump, barely anything, sent one glass tipping. A few drops of red wine landed on the hem of Victoria's white gown. The room didn't even register it as an accident. But Victoria did. Her face twisted, jaw clenched, eyes blazing with a fury that seemed far too large for a few drops of wine. "Do you have any idea what this dress cost?" she hissed, loud enough for heads to turn. Amara immediately apologized, voice trembling. "I'm so sorry, ma'am, let me." But Victoria wasn't listening. Something in her snapped. She grabbed a decorative riding crop from a nearby display, an antique piece meant only for show, and before anyone could react, she struck Amara across the back. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped a glass. The music stopped. Amara stumbled against the wall, pain flashing through her, tears burning her eyes. Not just from the sting, but from the humiliation of every single guest watching her, silent, doing nothing. And that's when the front doors opened. Daniel Hastings walked in, the man of the hour, the billionaire everyone had been waiting for, and froze mid-step. Because what he saw wasn't just his fiancée losing her temper. What he saw would change everything. Nobody in that ballroom breathed. Daniel stood at the entrance of his own home, still in his overcoat, keys in hand, staring at a scene that didn't make sense to him at first. His fiancée, chest heaving, riding crop still gripped in her fist. A young woman pressed against the wall, shoulders shaking, tears streaming down her face. And 300 guests standing in a circle like spectators at a public execution. "Victoria!" His voice was low, controlled. But underneath it was something colder than anyone had ever heard from him. "What did you just do?" Victoria straightened, smoothing her dress as if nothing had happened. "She ruined my gown, Daniel. She needs to learn some respect." "She's an employee," Daniel said. "Not property." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Others pulled out their phones, not to help but to record. Because in a world of billionaires and reality TV drama, spectacle sold better than sympathy. Daniel crossed the room in long strides and knelt beside Amara. Up close, he could see the raised, angry welt already forming on her exposed shoulder blade where her uniform had slipped. His jaw tightened. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, a tone none of the guests had ever heard him use. Amara nodded quickly, too afraid to speak, too aware that whatever she said next could cost her the job her family desperately needed. But Daniel wasn't looking at her like an employee. He was looking at her like a human being who had just been assaulted in his own home, in front of everyone he knew. "Someone call a doctor," he said, standing, his voice sharp enough to cut through the stunned silence. "Now!" Victoria let out an incredulous laugh. "Daniel, are you seriously making a scene over the help?" The word help landed like a slap across the room. Daniel turned to her slowly. "Say that again." Victoria, emboldened by champagne and years of getting away with everything, didn't back down. "You heard me. She's staff. This is what staff is for. To serve, not to embarrass us in front of everyone." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some guests looked away in discomfort. Others, disturbingly, nodded in agreement. People who had grown up in the same gilded world Victoria had, where cruelty toward the working class was simply normal. But not everyone agreed. Not Daniel's grandmother, seated near the front, who rose from her chair with the quiet authority of someone who had built this family's empire from nothing decades ago. "Daniel," she said, her voice steady, "I think it's time everyone here learned the truth about how this family really started." The room went still. Because nobody, not even Daniel, expected what she was about to reveal. Eleanor Hastings, 82 years old and sharper than anyone in that room gave her credit for, walked slowly toward the center of the ballroom. Her cane tapped against the marble floor with each measured step, and for the first time all night, every single guest gave her their full attention. 60 years ago, she began, I was a maid. Not a guest at a party like this one. Not someone's fiancée dripping in diamonds. I scrubbed floors in a house very much like this one, for a family very much like the one standing in this room tonight. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Victoria's face went pale. I was 17, Eleanor continued, working to support my mother after my father passed. And one night, much like tonight, I made a small mistake serving dinner. I spilled soup on a woman's dress. And she struck me. Just like you did to this young woman tonight. She turned, her eyes locking onto Victoria's. The difference is, that woman's son saw what his mother did to me. And instead of looking away, instead of pretending it was normal, he stood up for me. He fired the household staff who mistreated me. He paid for my education. And years later, her voice cracked slightly, the weight of memory heavy in her words. He married me. That man was Daniel's grandfather. The entire ballroom fell into stunned silence. Cameras that had been recording for gossip now captured something far more powerful. This family, Eleanor said, turning to face the crowd, was built by two people who understood that dignity has nothing to do with the size of someone's bank account. That kindness costs nothing, and cruelty costs everything. She looked directly at Victoria. You just proved, in front of every important person in this city, exactly who you really are. Victoria's hands trembled. The riding crop slipped from her fingers and clattered to the marble floor. Daniel stepped forward, standing beside his grandmother, beside Amara, not beside the woman he had proposed to just 3 months earlier. I think, he said quietly, this engagement is over. Victoria's carefully constructed world, the one built on status, cruelty disguised as confidence, and other people's silence, began to crumble in front of everyone who mattered to her social standing. But the night was far from finished. Because Amara, still trembling against the wall, had no idea that this single moment of humiliation was about to change the entire course of her life. The ambulance arrived 20 minutes later, though Amara insisted she didn't need one. The welt across her back was painful but not dangerous. Pride, however, was a different kind of wound entirely. As paramedics checked her over in a quiet side room, away from the whispering crowd, Daniel sat across from her, elbows on his knees, guilt written across his face. "I'm sorry," he said. "This should never have happened in my house." Amara looked up at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. Rich men rarely apologized to people like her. "It's not your fault," she said quietly. "You didn't do it." "No," Daniel agreed. "But I chose to build a life with someone who could do something like that without hesitation. That's on me." Amara studied him for a moment, the exhaustion in his eyes, the way his hands were still slightly shaking from anger he was working hard to control. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He nodded. "Why does it matter to you?" "I'm nobody. Just staff," like she said. Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're not nobody. And what happened to you tonight, that's exactly the kind of thing my grandparents built this family to stand against. My grandmother was in your position once. Nobody protected her either, until someone finally did." Amara's eyes filled with unexpected tears, not from pain this time, but from something rarer, being seen. "I have a nursing exam in 3 days," she admitted quietly. "I was going to work through the pain because I need this paycheck. My little brother has a heart condition. His surgery is scheduled for next month, and every dollar matters." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, writing something on the back before handing it to her. "Call this number tomorrow," he said. "It's our family foundation. Your brother's surgery. All of it will be covered. And your final semester of nursing school too." Amara stared at the card, speechless. "I can't accept that. I didn't do anything to deserve." "You didn't do anything wrong tonight," Daniel interrupted gently. "You got hurt in my home by someone I trusted. This isn't charity, Amara. It's what should have happened a long time ago. Someone finally standing up instead of standing by." For the first time that night, Amara allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this humiliating moment was about to become the turning point of her entire life. But neither of them knew yet just how far that turning point would go. Word spread fast. By the next morning, video clips from the party had exploded across social media. Not gossip about spilled wine, but raw footage of a wealthy woman striking a young maid in front of hundreds of witnesses, followed by an 82-year-old matriarch delivering a speech that silenced an entire ballroom. #Justice for Amara began trending by noon. Victoria's own family, embarrassed by the scandal threatening their social standing, distanced themselves publicly within hours. Business partners quietly withdrew from deals tied to her name. The engagement, already broken, became the least of her problems. Meanwhile, Amara sat in her small apartment, staring at her phone in disbelief as thousands of strangers left comments defending her, praising her composure, sharing their own stories of being mistreated by people who believed money made them untouchable. Her mother, watching the news coverage from the kitchen table, reached for Amara's hand. "Baby, are you okay?" "I don't know," Amara admitted. "Yesterday I was scared I'd lose my job. Today people are calling me an inspiration. It's a lot." Her phone buzzed again, a text from Daniel. "How are you feeling today?" No pressure to respond, just wanted to check in. She smiled faintly, typing back a simple thank you, still processing how quickly everything had shifted. Across town, Daniel sat in his office, watching his family's foundation coordinate Amara's brother's surgery with the city's top pediatric cardiologist. But something else was weighing on him, a decision he hadn't expected to make so soon after ending his engagement. He kept replaying Amara's face in his mind. Not the tears from the pain, but the quiet dignity she carried even while being humiliated in front of strangers. The way she refused to blame him. The way she thought of her brother before herself, even in that moment. It wasn't romantic, not yet. It was something quieter, recognition. The same recognition his grandfather must have felt 60 years ago, watching a young maid endure cruelty with more grace than the people mistreating her could ever understand. He picked up his phone and called his grandmother. "I think," he said, "I finally understand what you meant last night." Eleanor's voice was warm on the other end. "About what, dear?" "About choosing people based on their character, not their circumstances." There was a pause, then a soft, knowing laugh. "Took you long enough." Neither of them knew that 3 states away, Victoria was about to make one final, desperate move to salvage what remained of her reputation. And it would only make everything so much worse. Victoria wasn't used to losing. 3 days after the party, she sat in her lawyer's office, seething as her assistant scrolled through headline after headline, dragging her name through the mud. Heiress caught on camera whipping Maid. Hastings' engagement ends in scandal. The night old money showed its true colors. "I want a statement drafted," Victoria snapped. "Something about the maid provoking me. Something about staff members exaggerating for sympathy and attention." Her lawyer, a cautious man who had represented the family for years, hesitated. "Victoria, there's footage. Multiple angles. Flaudio. I don't think." "I don't care what you think," she cut him off. "I need my reputation back." But reputation, once shattered by one's own hand, rarely repairs itself through denial. Victoria released a public statement that evening, claiming Amara had deliberately provoked her and that the video was taken out of context. It backfired instantly. Within hours, more footage surfaced, this time from a guest's phone, showing the moments leading up to the incident in painful clarity. Amara hadn't provoked anything. She'd simply been doing her job, and a small accident had triggered violence from a woman used to controlling everyone around her. The backlash intensified. Sponsors for Victoria's family's boutique hotel chain issued public statements distancing themselves. Her closest friends, worried about their own reputations, stopped returning her calls. Meanwhile, Amara received an unexpected message, not from Daniel, but from a local news producer requesting an interview. She almost declined, uncomfortable with the sudden spotlight, but her mother encouraged her. "Baby, your story could help someone else who's scared to speak up," she said gently. "You don't have to be angry. Just be honest." The interview aired 2 nights later. Amara spoke calmly, without bitterness, describing not just the assault, but the years of quiet mistreatment many domestic workers experience without anyone noticing or caring. She spoke about her brother's heart condition, her dream of becoming a pediatric nurse, and how one moment of cruelty had accidentally opened a door to unexpected kindness. The interview went viral for entirely different reasons than the original video. Not outrage this time, but genuine admiration. Viewers didn't just see a victim. They saw a young woman with strength, humility, and purpose. Daniel watched the interview from his apartment, unable to look away. When it ended, he sat in silence for a long moment before texting her. "You didn't have to do that interview. But I'm glad you did. You told the truth without losing yourself in anger. That's rare." Amara's response came a few minutes later. "I learned that from watching how your grandmother handled things at the party." She didn't yell. She just told the truth, and it was louder than anything else in that room. Little did either of them know, that simple exchange of admiration was about to grow into something neither of them expected. Weeks passed. Amara's brother's surgery was successful, a quiet, private moment far from the cameras and headlines that had defined the past month. Watching her little brother open his eyes in the recovery room, color returning to his cheeks for the first time in years, Amara finally allowed herself to cry. Not from pain or humiliation this time, but from overwhelming relief and gratitude. Daniel visited the hospital that day, not for publicity, but quietly, almost hesitantly, carrying a small stuffed bear for her brother. "You didn't have to come," Amara said softly, meeting him in the hallway. I wanted to, Daniel replied. How's he doing? Better than we ever hoped. Her voice cracked slightly. Thank you. For everything. I still don't know how to repay this. You don't owe me anything, Daniel said firmly. This should have happened months ago, long before that party. No one should have to work multiple jobs while going to nursing school just to help their family survive. The system failed you long before Victoria did. Amara studied him for a long moment. You've changed since that night. Daniel let out a quiet, almost embarrassed laugh. I think I finally started paying attention to things I used to overlook. My grandmother always said wealth reveals character. It doesn't build it. I think I forgot that for a while. Over the following weeks, their relationship shifted slowly, naturally. Coffee after her hospital shifts, quiet conversations about family, dreams, and the kind of life neither of them ever expected to find themselves living. It wasn't rushed or dramatic. It was steady, honest, built on something far more solid than the world Victoria had represented. Meanwhile, Victoria's life continued unraveling. Her family, embarrassed beyond repair, quietly cut ties with public business ventures associated with her name. She moved out of the city entirely, away from the whispers and headlines that followed her everywhere she went. It wasn't a Hollywood downfall with explosive consequences. It was something quieter and, in some ways, more painful: irrelevance. The world simply moved on without her, choosing instead to celebrate a story of kindness over cruelty, resilience over privilege. Eleanor watched the changes in her grandson with quiet satisfaction, though she never said, "I told you so." She didn't need to. The proof was in the way Daniel now visited hospitals instead of galas, in the scholarship fund he quietly established for working students like Amara, in the way he'd finally learned to see people, not positions. But even Eleanor didn't anticipate what would happen 6 months later, the moment that would bring the entire story full circle. 6 months after the party that changed everything, the Hastings Foundation hosted its annual charity gala, but this one looked nothing like the extravagant, hollow event from before. Instead of exclusive invitations for the city's wealthiest families, the guest list included nursing students, hospital staff, single parents working multiple jobs, and community organizers who rarely received recognition for their tireless work. Eleanor had insisted on the change, and Daniel had wholeheartedly agreed. Amara stood near the entrance, wearing a simple emerald dress, nervously smoothing the fabric as guests arrived. She'd finished her nursing exams with top marks and had recently started working in the pediatric cardiology unit, the very department that had saved her brother's life. "You look like you're about to give a speech," Daniel teased, appearing beside her with 2 glasses of sparkling cider. "I am," Amara admitted. "Your grandmother asked me to say a few words tonight." Daniel smiled softly. "She has good instincts about these things." When the time came, Amara stepped onto the small stage, hands trembling slightly as she looked out at the crowd, a mixture of quiet working-class families and the few remaining wealthy guests who had chosen kindness over gossip. 6 months ago," she began, "I was just someone serving drinks at a party trying to survive. I never expected my life to change because of one painful moment. But it did. Not because of the cruelty I experienced, but because of the kindness that followed it." She glanced toward Eleanor, seated in the front row. A woman I'd never met stood up that night and reminded an entire room that dignity isn't something money can buy or take away. She taught me that speaking the truth, even when your voice shakes, is more powerful than staying silent out of fear. Her eyes moved to Daniel. And a man who could have looked away, who could have protected his reputation instead of standing up for someone he barely knew, chose kindness instead. That choice didn't just change my life. It saved my brother's life. The room fell silent, moved by her words. "Tonight isn't about that painful moment anymore," Amara continued, voice growing steadier. "It's about what we choose to do after painful moments happen. We can let cruelty define us, or we can let kindness redefine everything that comes after." Applause filled the room, warm and genuine. Nothing like the polite golf clap enthusiasm of Victoria's old social circle. This was real, earned, human. As Amara stepped down from the stage, Daniel met her at the bottom step, taking her hand gently. "That was beautiful," he said. "I meant every word," she replied softly. Neither of them noticed Eleanor watching from across the room, tears of quiet pride in her eyes, remembering another young woman decades earlier who had once stood in a very similar spotlight, humiliated, then healed, then finally, unmistakably home. A year later, on a quiet spring afternoon, Daniel proposed to Amara, not with an extravagant public spectacle, but in the small community garden the Hastings Foundation had helped build near the hospital where she worked. "I don't need a big ring or a big party," Amara had told him earlier that week. "I just need this to feel real." So Daniel kept it simple. Just the two of them, surrounded by tulips and the quiet hum of the city. His grandmother's old engagement ring, the same one Eleanor had worn 60 years earlier, now on Amara's finger. "You once told me you didn't know how to repay me for helping your brother," Daniel said, kneeling in the soft grass. "You never owed me anything, Amara. But if you'll let me, I'd like to spend the rest of my life earning the privilege of standing beside you." Amara, tears streaming down her face, could only nod, unable to find words strong enough for the moment. Their wedding, held months later, looked nothing like the lavish spectacle that had once defined the Hastings family's public image. Nurses stood beside business executives. Hospital cafeteria workers sat next to old family friends. Amara's mother cried through the entire ceremony, overwhelmed with gratitude for a life she never could have imagined for her daughter. Eleanor, now in her final years, sat in the front row, watching history quietly repeat itself in the most beautiful way possible. Cruelty transformed into compassion, humiliation transformed into hope, tragedy rewritten into triumph. Victoria, watching a brief clip of the wedding announcement online from her quiet, isolated new life, felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel. Regret. Not because she lost Daniel's wealth or status, but because she finally understood, too late, that the moment she raised that riding crop, she hadn't just hurt Amara. She had revealed exactly who she really was, and that truth could never be undone. Years later, Amara stood in the same ballroom where everything had once gone so terribly wrong, now transformed permanently into a community center for working families, funded entirely by the Hastings Foundation. Her own daughter, 5 years old, tugged at her sleeve, asking about the small plaque near the entrance. "Mommy, what does this say?" Amara knelt down, reading the words softly to her daughter. "Dignity is never determined by circumstance. Kindness costs nothing, but its absence costs everything." "This is where Mommy's whole life changed," Amara explained gently. "Something painful happened here once. But because of it, so many good things happened after." Her daughter looked up, curious. "Was it scary?" "Very," Amara admitted. "But sometimes the scariest moments teach us the most important lessons, that we're stronger than we think, and that kindness always